last almost 12 years here on the channel, we have done graffiti reviews of almost all the graffiti markers out there. And because there are so many different graffiti markers here, and because so many of them are so similar, it can be really hard to tell, you know, which ones are any good at all. And that is why today we are ranking every single graffiti marker here from D tier to S tier or God tier on our graffiti tier maker that we have set up here. And it's going to be every single graffiti chisel tip or bullet tip marker that I have used, reviewed, and have with me here. If you want to see a list specifically of graffiti mops where we did a tier list as well, I'll link it in the corner, but I'll also link that video at the end of this one as well. We separated them out because mops are kind of their own thing, and you know, we don't really want to compare apples to oranges. And because there are so many of these graffiti markers to get through, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about any of them in particular, but we do have full reviews on every single graffiti marker I have here today. Full reviews, full tagging tests. I'll link you to the important ones if there's ones I'm mentioning during the video, but you can check any of them out anytime for a full tagging test. So let's get to it. Now, in no particular order, we're gonna start here. We have the OTR Bullet Tip 4001. Now, this thing is actually a pretty big bullet tip. It's like 8mm, which is bigger than most bullet tips. Overall, though, this thing is going straight into C tier. The reason being, although the marker looks really sleek and you can see the color in the bottom and whatnot, it's just not comfortable. It's just a weird shape. I don't know why they would make a slippery kind of cylindrical marker like this rather than a more user-friendly design. That is basically the gist of it. It's just not all that comfortable to use. There's nothing explicitly wrong with the bullet tip here. It's nice to have a bullet tip that's that big. It's kind of hard to find, so in that respect it's nice, but in general it's a bit of a lackluster marker. So C tier it goes. Next up, we have the ES2 or the Eggshell 2 permanent marker. I don't even want to get into it. It is D tier. There's nothing good about this. They did everything wrong. Do not buy this, please. Next up, we've got the OTR .160. So this is basically your standard chisel tip size marker, but it is in a kind of mini pocket size. In general, I really do enjoy this design, but it's not really all that pocket friendly size-wise, just because it's hard to make anything any skinnier when you have that standard 15mm nib on there. Other than that, there's not really much wrong with the design or anything like that. If I'm recalling correctly, these go for a fairly standard price, so you're not being gouged or anything like that. So, you know, overall, I think it just has to be C tier. It's just nothing special. Also, before I go any further, what we're gonna do is we're gonna try and just put one, maybe two markers in the God tier, S tier slot so that we can really see which of these markers really reigns supreme in the graffiti world. Again, it's very, very personal preference based, so my opinion will very likely not match up with yours, but luckily you guys can leave your opinion in the comments and tell me why you're putting whatever markers you're putting in the S tier slot for yourself. Next up though, on a similar note, we have the Molotow, what even is this? It's the Copper Burner by Molotow. I found personally with these markers, they had a lot of flow problems. You know, it has the T-shaped nib. Some T-shaped nibs just don't do all that well. And when I think of T-shaped nibs, I think of ink markers, not paint. Paint has always had trouble flowing through markers like this, and that's what happened from the very beginning with this for me. These ain't cheap either, you know? So although part of it is just, you know, you gotta make sure you mix them really well before you start pumping and things like that, I'm just not up for it. And anything that comes with a bit of a premium price tag on it and isn't at least a step above other products, it's just, it ain't it. It's not for me, you know? So you guys might not like this. The 440p from Molotow, it's going D tier. Next up, we're jumping all over the place here. This is an extinct marker, and it's extinct for a very good reason. It is the Markwell T-shaped 50mm nib here. This thing, it's gotta be D tier as well. Anyone who has heard Markwell knows that their stuff is essentially just erasable. There's no other kinder way to put it. That's just how it is. Permanence is key for all us graffiti artists out there, and especially graffiti writers, right? D tier for this as well. We have yet to put anything higher than C tier right now. This is, you guys are gonna think I'm mean, Jeez, we'll get there, I'm sure. Next up, we have the Sharpie bullet tip markers. Now, these are paint markers. It's a water-based paint formula. So again, nothing particularly permanent. You can get them in many different bullet tip sizes. This one's probably a 4mm. The Sharpie ones, I found that with a lot of their stuff, they have a bit of flow issues if the marker's not like brand new and if you're not taking really good care of it. And the water-based paints are never all that permanent. So I really can't put this higher than C tier. Frankly, it's lucky it's even in the C tier. Since we're on the topic of Sharpie, Sharpie has always made their 15mm flat chisel tip markers as well. Same water-based paint formula in those, and you know what, they function just fine. With these bigger valve systems, you don't get as much issues as you did with the bullet tips from Sharpie. But again, this is water-based paint, not very effective for the graffiti writing environment. It's gotta go C tier. This is a very lopsided looking list. If you guys have seen the mop tier list, you're noticing some big differences. But I have to speak the truth, right? But before we go any further, I just want to let everyone know, if you want your own Tags, Throws, and Pieces shirt, they are available for purchase. I don't know how many of you actually know that, because they don't seem to put them under my videos to let you guys know that very often. So if you want your own, you know, it comes in many different colors here. We have our Tags, Throws, and Pieces hoodies too. There's no better way to support the lifestyle. And you know, these are actually quite comfortable, which is one of the reasons I went with the manufacturer that I did. I try and keep the prices as low as I can. So if you're interested at all, you can check these out. It's one of the first links in the description to the merch store where you can check them all out. I also have some of my other designs there in all over print. But if you're not seeing it below the video, check it out in the description and pick up your very own Tags, Throws, and Pieces shirt if you would like. It's something you can do for yourself and it supports the channel. So if you're up for it, check it out. But moving right on here, we have, this is the Arrow Mark or Mighty Marker. It's the PM23. Now this is a pretty standard size angled chisel tip, and this comes with a oil-based, is it xylene based? I'm pretty sure these are oil and xylene based paint. The thing I found with these is you really have to mix them like a lot more than other markers of similar nature, to the point where if you don't, it's hard for them to not write completely transparent. I'm sure you saw that in our review we did of them many years ago if you were around. But as far as the actual marker goes, it works fine. It's just the paint in these in particular was just kind of, I'm sure it's a great paint, and you know, that oil-based stuff and the xylene, it cuts through dirty, grimy surfaces, which is, you know, what us graffiti artists like, but their formula just did not work in this marker. It's a nice metal body marker and everything, so gotta go C tier. We're not breaking past C tier for this yet. Next up, we have the PX30 Silver. We did a review kind of recently of these PX30s. My main qualm with them, and I got a lot of flack for this because I said they were overhyped, but my main qualm with them is because they come about this full with actual paint formula. It's a beautiful oil-based paint. I would check the review out of this one in particular because I got a lot of really good shots of the paint formula in that one, and I think I really showed off just how great the actual paint formula actually is. It's an oil-based paint, you can't go wrong. It's very lustrous, and you know, all the markers from Uni are high quality, especially the valve systems, all metal body, right? So the marker itself, I'm putting it A tier. I can't put it in S tier. It's just, it is such an iconic marker though. It's gonna stay in A tier, and I'll tell you why. You know, you can't get more paint than what comes in here. It's not like they sell their silver refills, at least at time of recording. And one of the main reasons everyone loves these, I think, is because of the oil-based paint formula and the silver in particular. And if it comes with 20 mils at most of it, it just can't be God tier. I'm sorry. But hey, we're above C tier, right? One that's gonna be coming out of left field here is the Liquitex paint markers here. Now these are the standard 10mm ones as well. I will say this, I reviewed this, I wanna say 10 years ago. Maybe 11. This might be an 11-year-old review on the channel. I'm not gonna link you to it, but there's actually nothing wrong with these markers in terms of the physical marker. The valve system's very good. This thing, again, it's 10 years old and it still flows. flows today just fine. I've never really used them because they're just, the paint in them isn't that great for graffiti purposes, and it is kind of a transparent paint formula, but the actual marker is totally fine. Now, although most people would shove these straight into D tier just because they're expensive and the paint is not what graffiti writers are after, I'm just gonna put it in C tier. I think it deserves a spot in C tier just because the actual marker is pretty much okay. Moving on, we have the Krink K71. Now, this comes with the Krink ink formula, not the paint. One thing I found with their ink formula in particular, the light fastness is terrible. Any UV rays are gonna eat this up within, I'd say under 2 weeks if it's in direct sunlight. It's absolutely god awful, which is unacceptable when Krink is charging out the wazoo for any of their prices. The actual marker itself, this is the angled chisel tip, just like the Mighty marker ones. It's a good marker, you know, metal body, the valve works fine, the marker nib is just fine, but their ink is trash, in my experience at least. I don't know if you guys have a different opinion, feel free to leave it in the comments. Don't bite my head off, but yeah, this is, the decision is between C and D tier here. You know, there's just so many better options, it's gotta go D tier. I'm sorry, but yeah, it's going D tier. Next up, we have the Pentel Shorty White here. It's the 100W, technically is what it's called. This is a bullet tip marker. We actually modded this to be a chisel tip marker in the video I'm linking on screen right now. Definitely worth checking out there because the results of that were pretty awesome. And I also show you how to refill these in that video as well. It's a metal body marker designed to be disposable, but the last thing you want to do is get rid of this. This actual physical marker is so high quality that you're gonna want to keep it for as long as you possibly can. It's a beautiful shape to write with. Their capping system works just fine. Again, it's a marker made in Japan by Pentel. It runs beautifully, and that's not a surprise. A lot of people love the white painter ink. I don't actually know if it's painter ink that comes in this, and it's a strong paint or ink. Very, very white, which is nice when it comes to that because a lot of white paints are hard to make opaque. But I do have to say, I have no problems with this whatsoever. It's a fun marker to write with. It's an effective marker to write with. Going straight to S tier. S tier for the Pentel Shorty, guys. I think if there's one thing, well, if there's one thing I've learned, it's that no one agrees with anyone in the graffiti community, but I think you guys might agree with me on that one. I don't know, let me know. Anyway, moving on here, we have another standard angled chisel tip here. It's a IM14 bleed through marker by Mighty Marker or Arrow Mark as well. And this thing is quite good. Metal body marker. Because it has an ink, there's no mixing ball in there, but this bleed through ink really does bleed through. When we did our test of it, we covered it with several layers of spray paint and it just kept bleeding, you know? It's very effective. The marker itself runs beautifully. You gotta put this straight into, I think, A tier. It's gotta be A tier, believe it or not. Next up, we are back on the all the same reasons as with the T nib. This is straight into D tier. This one would be a bit of a strange one for you guys, but the Uni Posca, I think it's technically the PC8K is what they call it, but it is the angled chisel tip from Posca here. This one's an interesting marker. It's actually the only angled chisel tip that I've seen come in this exact size. The size is really nice to write with. It's nice and comfortable, and the angled chisel tip holds up just fine. But as with all your Posca markers, the paint formula is not all that permanent. This really is made for more sketchbook activities. So although it does work totally fine, you've got to put it into C tier. It's just nothing special for graffiti artists. Next up here, we have the Grog Cutter 08. This is the mini Grog Cutter, and as soon as I take the cap off of this, you guys will see what I'm gonna say. The nibs on these do not hold up. To be fair, nibs on all Grog mobs don't hold up, they're terrible. But also, to be fair, 8mm ones in particular are very, very hard to make stand up. There's something about getting that balance between durability and the actual just size of that 8mm that doesn't really work out all that well for this marker. That being said, I love writing with this marker. Just the flat chisel tip effect in that 8mm gives you a really nice edge you can get when you're writing your sort of mid-sized tags with it. The Grog Extra Flow paint that comes in this, I like it. The colors are great. It's not permanent, but it is totally weatherproof. And I'm slotting this straight into B tier. Next up on here we have the standard Grog cutter. It's a 15mm flat chisel tip nib. Again, same specifications in terms of the paint that comes in it as the Grog cutter 8mm. So this one I've got no problem with either. I think it's gonna go right into B tier for me as well. Next up, we have the Pilot Super Color Broad Marker here. Now this one might be a bit out of left field for some of you guys, but this is basically a nice angled chisel tip, pretty standard size, maybe a little bit fatter. It feels a little bit fatter when you're writing with it just because their nibs are a little bit soft, which we love. There's absolutely nothing you can say is wrong with this. Some people hate the squeaking noise of these writing, but that's just the kind of thing you get with these markers. It does feel a little bit cheaper than a lot of other markers you would get from Pilot, but I'm solidly happy putting it as a B tier marker on the list here. One of the last big guys we have here is the Molotow EM612. It's an empty tank marker. Now, if you want to know more specifically about how this one works, this one was a really cool one to do a tagging test with. I'll link you to that video on screen. I'd really recommend checking it out because I did not expect to love this marker and I love almost everything about it. The flow system that this marker uses is incredibly nice with the T-shaped nib, and even for their tank markers they have that refill from the back system. All I can say is check out the full review of this one. I have to solidly put this as an A tier marker. Perfect. And next up, we have a bit of a battle of the brands here. We have the Iron Lac pump action markers. They say these ones are 3mm. I only have a few of these and they are obviously sketchbook markers. I find they work just fine and that's kind of the long and short of it. They're nice ones to have. I'm comfortable putting these as a B tier marker. Similarly, the Molotow One For All markers here. Now these are, you can get the 4mm, you can get, they're much bigger markers. I certainly don't mind these. I used to use them more religiously than I do now. If anything, I know I've mentioned this, but they just have some valve issues some of the time, and it's because their paint is so heavily pigmented. But they're great markers to use on canvas. That's what I mainly use them for. Mostly in the past, I don't do all that much canvas work now, although I'd like to get back to it. You know what? Here's something I did here where I use specifically the Iron Lac ones and the Molotow ones. This is a canvas I have. It's quite old actually. I didn't know it was this old. It's from 2021. If any of you want it, hit me up. I would sell it for 50 bucks, or if you're a patron on the Patreon page, I would give it to you for 40. Shipped and everything. If you're interested, hit me up. But the purple there, that's the Iron Lac marker. I used the grays in the Molotow, and it is what it is. They hold up just fine. So long story short, for the Molotow ones, actually I'm gonna put them in A tier, although I'm not necessarily happy with all of their valves. Next up, we have the Posca markers, the bullet tip ones in similar sizes as these. You can get 1, 2, 4mm. They're good too. They're quite opaque, easy to use. For the most part, the valves are okay. They feel a little bit cheaper, and I think they come a little bit more empty than your Molotow ones do and your Iron Lacs do. So I'm putting this as a B tier marker. Last up here, what do we have? We have the Molotow Liquid Chrome. Now you can get this in different sizes. This is a 4mm bullet tip, and I don't want to create a lot of controversy right at the end of the video, but it's solid enough. Since I put the other Molotow One For Alls here in A tier, I have to put this in A tier as well. Believe it or not, their whole liquid chrome paint formula doesn't really do anything for me, and that's mostly because although it is a magnificent looking formula, I cannot condone how much they charge for this crap. I know it's harder to manufacture. I know you have to create smaller metal particulates to put into the pigment and whatnot, but I just cannot support the prices they charge for it. But be happy enough it's an A tier, guys, okay? I was tempted to put a B tier. Now, inevitably, I know you guys will not agree with at least something, or probably everything on the list. Everyone has their personal preferences about graffiti markers like these, so please feel free to let me know your reasoning for where you put some of these markers that you really feel passionate about in the comments. I'd love to hear it. If you did want to see the tier list of specifically the graffiti mops that we did, you can check that video out on screen. The list looks a lot different than this one looked. I'll see you over there soon. Until then, peace.